Good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome Hernan Diaz Alonso back to Hastings Hall as this term's Eero Saarinen visiting professor. The Saarinen Professorship was established in 1984 through the generosity and efforts of the architect Kevin Roach to honor his mentor, Eero Saarinen, who received a B.Arch degree from Yale in 1934. This endowed chair enables the school to invite a distinguished architect to teach a design studio each term. Previous Saarinen visiting professors include Richard Rogers, Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi, Philip Johnson with Peter Eisenman, Cesar Pelli, Zaha Hadid, and Frank Gehry. In spring 2014, the chair was held by the Toronto-based architect Bridget Shim, and this past term, the team called FAT sang their collective swan song while sharing the Saarinen chair. Hernan Diaz Alonso was born in Argentina, where he began his professional training at the National University of Rosario before working in the office of Miralles Tagliabue in Barcelona, and then coming to New York to receive advanced architectural professional training at Columbia. After graduating from Columbia in 1999 and a year as senior designer in Peter Eisenman's office, Professor Diaz Alonso founded Xefirotarch Architects as a multidisciplinary practice operating on the cutting edge of digitally determined architecture. In 2005, he was the winner of the MoMA PS1 Young Architects Program, and in 2012, he received the Educator of the Year Award from the American Institute of Architects, going on in 2013 to win the AR&D Award for Emerging Architecture and a Progressive Architecture Award for his design of the Thyssen-Bornemisza Pavilion Museum in Patagonia, Argentina. Hernan Diaz Alonso is one of the leading talents working in the field of digital design with an original approach that transcends the algorithmic repetitions of so many to engage in a dazzling world of color and narrative. His architectural designs have been featured in exhibitions at the Venice Architecture Biennale, the London Architecture Biennale, and the Archilab in Orléans, France, as well as displayed in featured exhibitions in leading architectural museums such as the New York MoMA, SF MoMA, Art Institute of Chicago, and the Max Center in Vienna. The firm's work is also part of the permanent collection of the FRAC Center of SF MoMA and New York MoMA, the Thyssen-Bornemisza Collection and MAC, and the Art Institute of Chicago. Professor Diaz Alonso is an inspiring and dedicated educator. He holds an ongoing appointment as architectural design professor in the Urban Strategies postgraduate program at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, which he will have to give up in the fall when he becomes the Distinguished Professor and Graduate Programs Chair at the Southern California Institute of Architecture, better known as SCI-Arc, where he will resume responsibilities for basically running the school. Professor Diaz Alonso is no stranger to Yale. In 2010, he was Louis Icahn Visiting Assistant Professor. Please join me in welcoming Hernan Diaz Alonso back to Yale, back to this room, and for honoring James Bond's An Admonition and Yale tradition by titling his lecture tonight, Shaken, Not Stirred.
Bob, thank you. I cannot thank you enough for so many kind words and invitations over the years. So let me get going. I want to do a small footnote, the tour on the title. Let me see. There we go. So to be absolutely honest, Jake in Noster, I was not really thinking that the first of this lecture and this title for this year will be here. It was Richard Defimeri who said, "Oh, such a great title in honor of Ordine." I said, "Yeah, what the hell? It's amazing." And I want to say for the record, I don't think that Bob is neither shaken or stirred. I want to be very clear about that. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the tradition of the Martinis and so on. But I really want to say that I want to really thank Bob for all this year. It's not very usual these days anymore to have deans who have the generosity and the curiosity to support young faculty or people who come from completely different approach to understanding of architecture. And sometimes we take those things for granted, and trust me on this, it's not that often. So he has been a very generous person and supporter in my life, and I will keep looking for advice in the years to come as I become Dean of SCI-Arc in September, which I will need your help. But I'd also, I will be the CEO, which is so East Coast and so Yale, which is so unlike SCI-Arc. But anyway, that's a different footnote. So the title of the lecture, Shaking a Stir, have to do with a notion which I think many of us, and particularly people in my generation, who were brought into the way when already the computational architecture was in full flesh, but also the same time in which the notion of theory and discourse was being revisited and reevaluated. So let me run a clip. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this.
For the gentlemen, vodka martini, shaken, not stirred.
Touche. A martini, shaken, not stirred.
Would you get me a medium dry vodka martini?
What is that?
Shaken, not stirred. Shaken, not stirred.
Vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. Shaken, not stirred.
This is the key, okay?
Vodka martini, shaken or stirred.
Do I look like I give a damn?
So, as you can see, as years go by and the modern Bond come to play, he's too busy doing stuff, killing people, having sex with women, all the wonderful things that James Bond do, to be wasting time in those little details. Jokes aside, I really think it's an important statement for me, in the sense of, in many, many ways, it has taken me a long time to figure it out where the nature of the work is. And I really felt like I never completely fall under any of the categories. And even in these current times, with some of my dearest colleagues and friends are very discussing and embracing like oriented object ontology or any of the things, I never felt like any necessity to do that. I always been much more interested in the production of a discourse that is embedded in the doing. Much more in the way that, I don't know, like film or fashion or any other disciplines will do. So that's basically my stake. The whole thing about shaking a stir is just give me the drink. So what I want to touch, I want to cover many things today, but basically at the end of the day, it can be reduced to maybe three main points. One, it has to do, which I think in many, many ways, for those of us who will be interested in the formal project, in the form project, in the form, the autonomy of the form in many ways and shape and directions, I think the close reading has been always a part of the argument, a part of the discussion. And I have to say that my own work, I will say, traces way more on the problem of virtuosity than the notion of close reading. But I will say the two main things that drive the work that we produce in the office, which of course has been informed through my years of teaching in SCI-Arc and in Yale and other places, it has to do with, for me, is the biggest contribution that digital tools and computational brought to the table, which is the possibility of new coherencies. What I mean by that is, if you think, for example, in the beginning of the 19th century, in German rationalism and romanticism, those ideas that can coexist were impossible. Now, computers allows us, for example, to be ultra-rational machines, algorithms and all that, and to be subject or open to the idea to be contaminated and to start to negotiate and produce new coherencies, and I will elaborate that later on. So the second part is what I call agents of contamination. I think we are, and I was talking this, we were discussing this with Mark H. and his student this morning. In many ways, one could argue that we are in kind of a secession digital period. Like the secession movement was this form of resistance in which the artists and artists were trying to reclaim a sense of individual notion within the middle of the Industrial Revolution. And I would argue that the notion of agents and contamination are different mechanisms that many of us are trying to figure it out, how to reclaim that sense of that within the larger context of the problem that we're trying to work. I'm not going to read any of this. You can choose to read it or not. There are certain kind of certain basic points about this notion. So the notion of virtuosity, as I said, is not for everybody. It's not a need to be required, but it's something that fascinates me, and I tend to be obsessed with that. And I will make a relation between obsession and virtuosity. I don't think every obsession requires a virtuosity, but in my case, I think obsession and virtuosity, they go hand to hand. And the other thing which I will say is, in many ways, some of the work that has been associated with these conditions have to not be associated with the work of process, research, experimentation, transformations. None of them, I think, really interest me or apply in terms of my work. I'm much more interested in the notion of hyperreality. What I'm interested in is that the work is a work that is built to be real, even though the real is not maybe the absolute or the conventional real. They have to do maybe with the construction of parallel reality. So I don't consider my work research. I don't consider my work experimental. I don't consider my work visionary, even though it may be perceived like that. I just try to give an answer to a problem that is posed to me in the way that any other architect will do. I'm aware that what I do looks in the way that it looks, so I understand the perception of that, but I don't operate like that. And in that sense, I'm a very conventional architect. No one project that we've done in the office, no one project I'll show you tonight is a self-made, invented problem. All of them has been a competition or a client or an exhibition or something that was commissioned to us. To me, these are important things because it has to do with the very root of my original education in Argentina. So we are, I think, in an era of, still we are in an era of shifting paradigms in the way that our field has been shaped in the last 25 years or so. And I think the amazing exhibition here are some of the early stages of that. Not so early, actually. I think that was already in the second phase. Deal with that. But I will say within those shifting paradigms, which I think there are many, there are a couple of them that are more important than others to me. One is what I would call the shift from representation to simulation, which to me is a critical one. I like to think that my work belongs to the tradition of those architects in which the relation of representation and relation of the production of the thing were very intertwined. I mean, from people like Enrique Miralles, who I work, or people like James Stillness and the axonometric, or Morphosis and their elaborated drawings, or Peter with all this analytical work. So to me, those always been in which the notion of representation is part of the speculation. Now, my interest has to do more how the simulation became a shifting paradigms. I don't think that simulation eliminates representation. I think absorb representation and add other layers to it. And so the work a little bit tried to deal a lot with that, and I think part to have to do my own obsessions about. Originally, I wanted to be a filmmaker and not an architect, and I think you have to do the ambition to integrate that. But at the same time, it has to do with a very brutal, honest way to work. We have to do that. We are using animation software, and we're using camera-driven and virtual camera. Might as well start to use those occasions as an opportunity to rethink how we design and how we work on it. This is an animation of one of the last competitions that we did. This was for a museum in Budapest. And part of the notion is the way that we're trying to design some of these projects is we try to build these films first and how the project will be in relation to the camera. So in the way that we will operate traditionally with plans or sections, we try to do the same using these virtual cameras and so on. Also, we're adding a whole series of layers of things that don't really exist. It's not like the building will be bubbling or they will be moving. Those are part of the construction of the cinematic effects of what the film tried to do. That then the project is trying to capture some of those senses, but it's not like it's a building with robotic parts that will move and so on. This will have to do much more with the process of developing the methodology to work on the design. The other thing which I think is important in relation to this is, unlike some of the work that has been done and is done through it, We use multiple platforms, and I believe a lot in the notion of corruptions of softwares and how we work multiple of them. I'm not married to any particular ethos of dogma of software. We use sometimes a script and parametric effects. Sometimes we use Paintbrush, Maya, whatever it is. So I don't subscribe to one particular religious approach to the notion of software. What I'm interested in terms of the technology, it had to do with the expansions and the emerging qualities of new aesthetics that we can produce in relation to that. Now, I will be the first one to say, yes, I'm a formalist. I'm a proud one. I never hide. I think we should have a parade. Now that the country is evolving in accepting other forms of life, I think it's time for us, the formalists, to come out into the open and don't be ashamed of being. But also, I think you have to do, if you're interested in that, of course, the notion of geometry is crucial in the whole establishment. But I would argue that my own interest in terms of part of this body of work and part of the development of this tool have to do with another shifting paradigm, which I will consider the notion of geometry to image. What I mean by that is we are mediated by these images, even when we do in drawings. They're images of drawings. And this may be completely oversimplification of it, but I really believe a drawing is only a drawing if you do it by hand. If you do it with a computer, it's an image of another drawing, and it's a whole different other ethical apparatus to it, attached to it. So I'm very much interested in the condition of the image as the vehicle for the production of form, or cinematic form, if you will, which is, I think, I don't know what happened here. Okay. So, but that doesn't mean that we will not do a plan for the project. What I mean by that is not the geometry will not going to be in the traditional sense, a driven force, but they have to do with the relation of how the image operates in relation to that. It's not that different to think, let's say, the difference between X-ray and an MRI. So it's not like the MRI doesn't have similar information to X-ray. It's just conveyed in a different way, and it produces a whole series of multiplicities in relation to it that I think allows to have like a holistic or a kind of a overall understanding of the thing. The other element which is crucial in my obsession have to do with the notion of another, what I would consider a shifting paradigm, which is the notion of beauty to beautiful. And this doesn't quite work in English, assuming the language that you listen is English, which can be discussed. But it works much better in Spanish. In Spanish, the difference is between belleza and bonito. What I mean by that is beauty is kind of a canon. It's established over time by culture, by society, by the understanding of principles of it. Bonito in Spanish is more a temporal thing. It's something that has to do with the immediacy of that time, of that moment. So there are certain things that it will change. What we consider bonito today will not be 10 years from now. So beautiful is not exactly that. I know that in English, beauty and beautiful are more similar, but that's what I'm trying to convey. So what I'm interested in is kind of a much more contemporary emerging qualities of beauty, which belongs to a particular period of time, and is not ruled or governed by the traditional sense of the classical sense or even the scholar sense of what we consider beauty. So now working into the work of the project, into the projects, I will say the work that we produced in the last 10 or 12 years in the office can be divided basically in agents of contamination. I think there has been 5 phases. 1, biology, ornament, cinema, rituals, and butchery. What I mean by biology, it has to do with which many of, get it out. Okay, we're ready to go? Okay, so it has to do with, I think, as I was discussing this morning with some of the students, in the 90s, there was a necessity to produce a quasi-scientific argument as an alibi. There was a need with all the computer and software technology emerging in our field. There was an alibi to try to make, we were borrowing alibis, and one of them was a quasi-scientific or a biological one and so on. Of course, there was a direct close sympathy between the formal behavior of the thing and how that would be biological and so on. So in a way, whether we like it or not, I would accept that the early part of the work was related to that problem. And it has to do with the lack of challenge on my part, or the lack of forcing the subject on contamination to the nature what the tool was giving you. In a way, the early work was very much driven by the capacity of what the software was able to do. So another time, I will say it was kind of a very kind of hypercoherency. So there was this idea that there was singular surface trying to do the same. There was a lot of topological variations and so on. But one of the projects I show introduced a possibility, which somebody was commenting on the work, of the condition of the grotesque, a certain grotesque quality. And to me, that was a very interesting notion because there was kind of an intuition that there was an emerging aesthetic effect that was coming from work generated by computer, but nobody was really writing about it or really speculating about that. There still was a kind of a technical approach to some of the arguments. And the perception of the grotesque was an interesting one because, in a way, the first assumption that one does, and I did, like everybody else, is that grotesque is something disgusting or ugly or something like that. It's not. The origin of the word grotesque have to do, and we can trace it to, let's say, some of the Black period paintings of Goya, is basically when any aesthetic effect or aesthetic condition cannot be cataloged or put in place in relation to the canon established of an aesthetic moment. So to me, that was an interesting one because it was a way to start to liberate that some of those rules. Now, the problem is, one of the problems is that the grotesque, it can be coordinated to a point, it can be manipulated to a point, but I think it's more like an emerging quality. So it's very difficult to break it down in some kind of a methodological or apparatus way of working, which in a strange way, I'm very fascinated by it. So when we were doing the competition for PS1, that notion was very much in place. So we start to flirt also with the notion of horrific, a narrative of horrific on cinematic narrative like Alien or Ridley Scott and so on. So part of that animation that you were seeing was basically the way that we present the project to the jury. We didn't reveal the drawings of the model until the very end. We have then, that movie goes for like 20 minutes. So the idea was to immerse them in this kind of a narrative in which you don't know exactly what you're looking. So we were borrowing for these horrific constructions, which is something that you can manipulate in particular moment to create a sense in the audience and so on. Now, the problem with these things is then once in a while, in my case, very much once in a while, you win one of these things, and then you have to build it. And this is the moment that you think, look, minimalism may have some merits that it need to be revisited. But then it's too late, and you are in it. And so then scripting is not just a way to produce format, it's a way to start to manufacture close to 1,500 pieces of structure in which not two of them were equal, which is a terrible idea. The thing which I always said to the students every time, if you want to present the competition, it's really, really important that your engineer has a British accent. It goes a long way to convince the jury that the thing will not fall apart. German accent is a second choice. Try to stay away from Midwest accents. Engineers, they don't confine a lot of security on the jury. Anyway, we did it, we built it, it was what it was. But it has a whole series of interesting things that they were emerging, which was some of the material effects that we were doing, we were pushing because the time frame was too short, so the fiberglass started to bubble up, and so a bunch of things that happened by accident. Then Nicola, Eurosoftware, at the time was a New York Times critic, was telling me, but Hernan, you did that on purpose because you're so into the horrific and so on. And the answer was, of course. It wasn't. But then that things start to trigger, and I'm a very strong believer in the mechanism of autopsy of working. This is something I literally stole for working with Enrique. And when you work with somebody with Enrique, or like when you work with somebody with Peter Eisman, these are, you have to be paying attention because every minute you can learn something that you can steal and put in your pocket and take it away for the rest of your life. I think stealing is the best form of learning. Metaphorical and literally. So if you can steal things along the way in the office, it's good too. But what happened with that was, what I learned for Enrique was the notion of autopsy, which is the idea that you do a project and then the genesis of the project, or some mistakes, or some things, or some byproducts of that project can become the genesis of the next one. So in doing that kind of acceleration, distortion, permanent state of transformations of the material happened in PS1, it starts to trigger an interesting idea to explore the notion of a species or blood coagulation. So what if instead to start to think in terms of type, we start to think in terms of species. And the project started to become by families. And instead to work in a singular project at a time, we will work of cellular cell systems. So when we did this solo show on the SF MoMA, we convinced them that we didn't want to do like a conventional show showing models and drawings, but we wanted to show more like an effect or a process in permanent state of transformation. So when you will walk in, you will see all the cells, and then you will see all the animation that make these cells into becoming a concert hall. Or, of course, there's a huge level of fakeness and mutation and design, which I'm very sympathetic to it. So it's never so linear. That's why, for example, parametricities and all those things are not so appealing to me. But the idea was, again, to start to operate with the notion of speciation. So you can have a whole families of processes that emanate about singular entities. And in that sense, that's where I think to have a certain methodic logic is an important one. But it's not so much, I think, about how do you know which one goes, which one don't go. You start to see them as a continuous that keep transforming from one project to another. So when the show moves from one museum to the other one, and so on. And this is in 2006, but then you revisit some of those ideas maybe 7 years later. We were working for Boeing for almost 2 years and trying to develop a center for aerospace experience. The idea was to produce a customer experience center for the CEO of big companies. So in a way, they were not so interested in some of our recent work, and I will show in a bit. But they were interested to go back to some of those kind of a more pure, smooth surfaces and so on, which we were with them. Unfortunately, the project right now is a limbo. The person who was working with us inside the company got promoted, and the project got demoted, so which is a interesting. Anyway, to tell you the truth, the project was getting, it's a long story. But in any case, we are grateful to them. They allow us to learn a bunch of things. And anyway, they're a terrific client to work with, but sometimes those big corporations, it's very difficult to get everybody on the same page and the right time. In any case, but my point is, the ideas are never really statics. I like to think that you're always evolving, but what happens is when you're confronted with certain projects or certain limitations, you go back and revisit some of them. So some of the ideas that you're working on, you never know where they're going to come to play. So for me, that's what I'm saying, to organize the notion of a species. So even though this project was 2013, it belonged to a species of contamination that was more in 2005, 2004, and whatever. So it's not the best thing that we've ever done, but it was okay. But the other thing was really interesting was in which the architecture was one part of the problem. Half of the project was also to work in all the media with Alex McDowell. He's an extraordinary Hollywood stage designer and production designer. It was about not only the architecture, but all the other things that will happen in parallel to it. It has a huge amount of technology that will be embedded. So the idea is if the people for QuantaScan, the whole thing will change to red, and if the people from whatever, British Airways will be black and white. So there will be a whole series of things. So part of the fascination of the project was not just the pure formal aspect. It was have to do also with a whole series of other integration of media. Now, another agent of contamination over time has been, for example, ornament, which is something that, again, to me was one of the pretty interesting things that computers brought back to the table, the idea that you can have a coherency that includes ornament, which, again, modernism and many others, starting with Adolf Loos and others, were very capable of, were very engaged in killing. So we were not interested per se in the traditional sense of ornament. What I think is interesting is what I would call it might have to do more with plastic surgery. Like ornament, in one way you can think it's like accessorizing or putting a bunch of jewels on yourself, like I do. But this is more like plastic surgery. So it's the idea how ornament starts to become embedded with the whole nature of the origin of the project. So, for example, if you look at when we were doing PS1 was based on one cell that produced a huge amount of variation, but topological can be traced always to the same one. When we start to do, as the project keeps going, the big project, the capital project, the office project, we start to work with multiple cells. And the idea is that these multiple cells can produce these multiple ontologies. So the project, it would have a certain level of variation embedded with that. So some of those cells, can be embedded with certain structural properties, another with envelopes, like unlike PS1. This one is made out of 5 different, it doesn't look like, but it was made out of 5 components that can be repeated and produce variation. This was an invited competition for a guest house for artists and residents in Paris for the art collector Nathalie Ceruzzi. But the other thing which also this one triggered was to rediscover my love and passion to speculate about drawings and assemblies and so on. So the idea how we relate with the notion of drawings as images and not drawings as a hand construction by compass and triangles. I had to say I never sketched, even when I was working by hand. I always used to work with compass and triangles. I always been obsessed with super precise way of constructing, which also that's why I think I like so much computers, the level of precision of it. The other shifting paradigms, and I think it have to do with some of these ideas, and it's very present in the work, is the idea of moving to zoom in and zoom out in terms of a scale. Well, one of the things which is kind of problematic, but at the same time, I think it's a wonderful opportunity working with some of these toys, have to do with the notion that it doesn't quite require a predetermined scale. But what I mean by that is, when I used to draw by hand, I mean, you will have the balloon, and you will have to decide in advance, I'm going to do a 1 to 500, 1 to 100, 100 drawing. I mean, you will have to do it before, because if not, it will not go anywhere. So you are forced already to produce the next amount of information, and usually the way that you work, you will be scaling up as the days go by. So I don't know, my project in school in Rosario will be, you will start with 1 to 500 plan, trying to put in the side, related in the side. Then the next drawing will be a 1 to 200 plan. Eventually, you will make it to 100, 150, construction detail 125, and if you're really good at it, you will go to 110. But it was a kind of a progressive thing. Now, with the computer, all that can collapse into one entity, potentially. So it has a sense of in which the scale is really, in a way, the scale is pretty much related to amount of kind of formal effects or desire or other things. So the scale can have to come to play in a different way that just the absolute terms of what it was. So this was a sort of show that we did at the MAC in Vienna, in which, unlike in PS1, we wanted to work with a much more literal physical manifestation of cinematic effects. So the idea was not so much to produce a singular object pretending to be an architecture quasi-building like PS1, but to really work with kind of a much more art object scale in which the collection of all of them would organize the space in a different way. So it was a way to try to blur the building between, or create a bridge between an architecture way of thinking, despite what, to my best effort, every time I try to flirt with art, it doesn't quite work, because if you're trained with an architect, you're trained like an architect, you will think like an architect. So I would say this project have artistic effects, but I will not consider a project of art. The way this assembly, the way that you think about the space and so on, you have to do much more with architectural logic. But my desire was also to work with this problem of the scale and to try to produce like a certain proto-quality that can be scaled up into other projects. So as you can maybe notice by now, the modus operandi of the office is very much, we don't leave anything out. So every phase, it have more stuff. So we did ornament, yes, now we're going to do something else, but ornament doesn't go away, it stays. So it's not about replacing one agency of contamination. Another is keep adding to the pool. So again, it has to do with this notion of evolving the species or whatever we want to call it. So this notion of units or formal units or cells, whatever we want to call it, as we move by, they get more and more complex. So we were developing these benches for the woman that we were in the house. So out of that, a variation of that, it became this chair that was commissioned to us by the Art Institute, which was basically literally playing around 2 days with a scripting that would produce a virus of distortion in the famous IMS chair. We literally modeled the IMS chair, and we start to use a whole series of virus to distort it and so on. It have to do also with my obsessions. It have to do with medicine and very bad things. So, I mean, the more, I always think that working by opposition is an interesting one. So if you're interested in beautiful or beauty, the more disgusting thing that you can think of it, the more disgusting thing that you can pay attention to it, the better chance that there is in that conflict, some new possibilities would emerge. But at the same time, as I said, I'm very obsessed with the notion of virtuosity and how to control those mechanisms. So the work is really about working on it, keep working on it, and so on. And it's never so much about making a singular decision. It's all about to keep that kind of a permanent evolution of multiple, if possible, to work in multiple scales at the same time. I always try in the office to try to work in different scales, in different projects at the same time, because when I work with a singular project, I tend to be a disaster because I try to put everything in one, which I still do. But when you have more projects, it's like having multiple kids. You're going to spread your love or hate, whatever it is. So the other agent of contamination I call is the notion of misfits, or what I call rituals. I start to pay a lot of attention to the notion of rituals, because there's something really, most of them, not all of them, but most of them have this fascinating quality to have something very sophisticated and something very primitive coexisting in one of them. And I'll get back to that. But this was the first thing that we worked with Alessi. There was a silverware collection that we call it Mutant Manners. It was in 2009. And part of that was to look at that. But to me, this one was really almost stylistic, because basically the thing completely behaved like a regular silverware. It just looked weird and fancy, but it doesn't change anything. So there was something about that it was not ritualistic enough. Nevertheless, in these multiple families that we're saying, in parallel when we're doing with Alessi, Selfridges in London commissioned us to have some kind of installation in one of their windows, which at the end didn't happen. And in parallel to that, we were doing a competition for a media art museum in San Sebastián. It was called Tabacalera because it was in an old tobacco factory. So this notion of the scale, the zoom in and zoom out, to me is one of the most interesting possibilities that working in this way allows us. So the idea that what it was in the Mac, an object which they can become a silverware or an art piece for a department store in London, can also have a similar genetic code, for the lack of a better word, to produce a competition for a museum. So the notion of how you start to load the scale becomes, I would not say arbitrary, but it has to start to become specific in terms of how you want to move the effect from one to the other one. The other thing which was interesting about this particular project was, it was a project that it was an intervention and renovation of the factory. So there was something really fascinating to me. It was the first project that we done in a long time, or probably since ever, in which you need to coexist with an existing tissue. Which was a really interesting idea, this notion of friction between the species of the city as an existing quality and what we can add to it. So that, again, as the autopsy, this logic of the autopsy, that what you work in that, it became a genesis that can generate method for the next one. This notion of working with an existing tissue, it triggered a curiosity on my part. What if some of the work that we've been doing start to negotiate, to absorb and incorporate familiarity, to produce conditions that we can recognize? In this case, it was an existing building, but what if we start to fabricate some of them? What if we start to relate with Platonic geometries or grid or things that we can relate to it in a different dimension, maybe by confrontation, maybe by friction. Either way, particularly the plans drawing was the one that triggered that the most in this. So my mind is a very playful and curious one. So I usually work by intrigues or things that triggers. So in a way, as I was saying this morning, I try to be a very honest lecturer. So everything I'm telling you right now is absolutely honest, but doesn't mean I'm telling you the truth. What I mean by that is I'm constructing right now a narrative or a way to think about the work, which I'm not quite sure that was exactly what I was thinking when we were doing, because as I said, it's the Daniel Craig James Bond thing. It's I'm much more interested in the doing on the production of the things, that they have like a predefined speculation in advance. Now, I think you build that in any way, and it starts to become something that it becomes fairly automatic, like riding a bicycle or anything else that you do, and then you realize that actually there is a lot of method to madness, or whatever one of those cliches we can call it. So to me, like for example, this was one of the first projects that we incorporate platonic geometry, one of the very few first one that we have that you can recognize circles there, which we never did before. It was kind of a super intentional attitude to have no recognizable platonic geometry in the work. So for me, the notion of rituals, and this brings us to for the last 25 minutes of the lecture. I think I'm halfway, right? Are we okay? How many of you are fall asleep? We're with you. All right. So, which is really the core of the work, which is the most recent work, which is the notion of rituals. And for example, what I was talking about romanticism and rationalism of the notion of rituals, the idea that you have the matador with some of the most elaborate costume that not even women will use, and then he's doing the most brutal thing, which is killing this guy, right? So there is something about that fascinates me, which we used it a lot when we did our second and third collection for Alessi, which is along the same lines. I'm going to cut this animation short because it's way too long, but basically both of them, one is 2010, the other one is 2011. But the one, particularly the one in the left, was predicating the notion again to this kind of a high-end, low-end. So part of the thing is, and this was for Alessi Officina, which is the kind of the high-end collection of them, which is is fabricated on the premise that people are not going to really use it. So you don't need to worry about that much about that part. It has to look that you can use it, and if you decide to it, you can use it, but you're not obligated. So part of what I wanted to do, I was watching Cronenberg too at that time, and Death Ringers, and what I wanted to do was a series of objects that you will be very afraid of using, and that you will feel uncomfortable when you have to use it. So that's more or less where it goes. But again, it goes for like 20 minutes because it was almost like a commercial that we did for them. But basically, in the first collection, it was this one, which was completely ornamented and over the top. And my favorite piece is the silverware. It was really interesting because if you would eat, you would have to eat like this. So it will completely change the way that you behave to the person next to you. So this is for those who think that extreme formalism doesn't create social behavior. It does. It just doesn't do the proper one. But to me, this became like a fantastic petri dish of a whole series of ideas, and it became something else. So, but the idea to produce a whole series of objects and a collection that was all based on the same series of formal configurations and as many as we can came, from trays to silverware to ashtray to cigar cutters. Now, the collection 1 year later was slightly different. We were trying much more to work with them with their means of production. So the idea to figure it out, a single sheet of metal, which is really what they prefer. So we start to figure it out, okay, what if we work with a single sheet of metal and manipulate and cut it and embed it with ornament, and then we can have the candles, and the candle wax will be part of it. So it was much more the ritual thing start to play. So because the idea will be that the wax will get into the things, and they will become much more dirty, and so on. So at the end, this is the one that's going into production. It's a wine cover, whatever. I don't know. It's too small. We did also a display system for them, and that was in parallel when Peter Nover asked me, this is 2011, not 2012, sorry, when the Mackey Apartments by Schindler got reopened 3 years ago in Los Angeles. He asked a couple of architects and a couple of artists to do a series of small installations in 4 of the garages. And the budget was very, very tight. But I was really flirting with this notion of romanticism and mutation and growth and decay and all these agencies. I'm talking about the ritual of cemeteries and dying, and particular Mexican cemeteries and Mexican funerals, which is very close to Argentina. They're even more tragic. The Argentinian ones, they are more dark. So what we decided was, with the little budget that we have, we went to the flower market in Los Angeles, and I hired 3 ladies who make funeral arrangements, and they had this technique that they can make a structure out of flowers. So we did this, and we bought off the shelf a couple of things. We put a bunch of DVD players inside with animations. The show's supposed to be there for 3 months in the summer. By the first month, it smelled like a cemetery. The flowers start to get dry, and eventually everything collapsed. But again, something that was kind of a game on and almost like a flirtation, as I said, with this artistic quality. It became like a potentially something really interesting, methodical, which is I always been very bad with color and figured out how to use colors. And I thought, okay, we start to incorporate flowers and vegetation and all those things. And it may be a way to deal with color. So we did a whole series of, this is not a story, but we did a whole series of movies on flowers. And we will transform the colors and so on. But so part of that thing, which again, it was a small art installation, became a trigger to develop a whole agenda in relation to that. So by now, we have a species, cells, ornament, flowers, and romantic ornaments and whatever. So Francesca von Habsburg, who has this amazing foundation in museum in Vienna called Thyssen-Bornemisza Art 21, which is basically hosts her contemporary collection, commissioned 3 architects to develop small pavilions, museums in different parts of the world. We will commission this one in Patagonia. So the idea was to produce this over-the-top ornamented structure that in which we don't build the volumes of the space, still the structure will be there, but that we can grow all the flowers and vegetation so it can change over time. So during the season of the year, the building will look different, we'll have different colors, we'll have different effects and all that. It was too big, well, we have a whole series of issues. But the idea, it was basically a park with some pavilions along the way. This was the model that we did for for the Venice Biennale. So 4 years later, we got commissioned by the regional agency of Barcelona. We are working this project. If this should not, I shouldn't be on record of this. Let's say the political climate in May elections will decide if this project is built or not. That's as far as I will go. But we got commissioned this pedestrian bridge that in Sant Adrià de Besòs, which is a city next to Barcelona, which connects where the Barcelona Forum is to Sant Adrià de Besòs. In a way, the project is 4 years later, but we went back and we revisited some of those ideas that we were developing for Thyssen-Bornemisza. So in this project, we are working right now. It still is work in progress. And we've been working with Klaus Bollinger, the German engineer who's worked with Wolf, Prix, and Zaha Hadid. And actually, he keep telling us that our attitude towards structure is super conservative because he said we have way too many columns. I think he spent too much time working with Wolf, who doesn't want to have any columns. I like columns. I like to have a lot of, as far as I can have a lot of something, it's fine. So the idea of one column doesn't appeal to me. I like a lot of things. So, but I thought what I like about the idea of a lot of columns was a way to organize the kind of diagram of the structure to become the formal thing, but also the idea that the bridge can have some flexibility because this is for people to walk, run, and bicycle. That's it. There's nothing else. There's no cars and so on. So it doesn't need to support a heavy load, so it's a fairly light one. So we were looking a lot into bamboo bridges and things like that. So part of the principle is like that. And it doesn't look like, but it actually is basically there are only 3 modules that get repeat and rotate. And it's really bridge only in this part. In this part, it's more like a pathway. This is an ecological protected area. It doesn't look as good as that in green. It's actually much more dry and so on. But part of the challenge is this is at the edge of the river when it connects with the Mediterranean Sea. So part of the problem had to do with corrosion and so on. So at some moment we were thinking to do everything in bamboo, but then we realized the bamboo is super expensive to do like. So now we're going with this. But anyway, this is the latest version. There probably will be others coming up. But this is what it is. So for those of you who have been in Barcelona, the Tokyo Forum is somewhere here. This is somewhere here. So this is at the end, so you will connect our thing and it will connect you with Sant Adrià de Besòs. But this is what I was talking about. This basically this one main module that produces many variations and rotations and so on. It works basically like a jewelry chain, so it has certain flexibility. And then we have all these kind of eyes and spheres, and we can have weird, strange plants that are part of this ecological thing. But anyway. Okay, the drawings are super heavy, I don't know why. So that's the main plan, that's the main elevation, some of the details and all the rotations of the angles of the piece, how you combine and have the assembly and all that. So right now we're getting terrified because we presented to the mayor of Sant Andreu de Besòs and the mayor of Barcelona, and the neighbors like it and so on. So we don't have that much opposition left. So if it doesn't happen, we have to do political climate or because we cannot push forward. They also commissioned us to do a proposal for the sidewalk. The bridge is here. So they commissioned us also to work in the sidewalk for Sant Andreu de Besòs. This is one of the few times I collaborate with my wife, Florencia Pita, because as I said, I don't know what to do with colors. And she's all the time working with colors, so she developed all this ceramic pattern, which we make it darker and more sinister. It's way more happier, but I couldn't take it in the renders. So we went from the Prince of Darkness style to it. But it's basically sidewalk, and basically is to control the sand. But the idea was to produce almost this kind of, again, almost this cinematic effect. So there's a lot of similarities of things, but the idea is also to produce a very continuous open space. So, of course, we look a lot of Murle Marx, sidewalk in Rio, some of Enrique's operations in Park, and a bunch of other things. But this one, that one is nowhere. We'll see what happens. But so the last part, the last 15 minutes, is about the most recent work and the one I'm obsessed the most. We have to do with butchery, which is one of what I call the new coherences. Butchery came to my interest in a very strange, as the last agent of contamination to that, in a very strange way. This is Francis Malman, one of the most famous chefs in Argentina, which decided 6 years ago, 7 years ago, that he wanted to start to combine some of the most primitive way of cooking a whole cow, the way the gauchos did it. But he started to develop all the structures for it and so on, and then combine it with some of the most sophisticated high cuisine cooking. So that was really interesting to me, but also there was a little bit of biographical thing about being Argentinian and a Spaniard from my father's side, and becoming a father. I don't know, something very weird that I became very obsessed with this notion of very Argentinian motives and so on, and go back to in a primitive way and figure it out how the filter through technology can produce this kind of anomaly. So I'm not talking about Damien Hirst, I'm not talking about the art, I'm literally talking about butchery. And there is incredible level of sophistication for many regards. One have to do the ritual thing and so on, but the other one is a fascinating one, is one of the first things that there is really three-dimensional cuts. It's really topological, this interaction between the act of a geometrical cut, but also the relation of the resistance of the flesh, the bones. Each of them produce something else. So it's incredibly methodic, it's incredibly precise, and it's to the service of something incredibly primitive. So 3 out of 3, it got me at hello. So, oops. Okay, this one is not playing, but in any case, we went full-fledged into it, and this one was the first one after that. This is the second version from the Thyssen-Bornemisza Pavilion, and we maybe went way too literal. The animation is even worse, so actually it's better than maybe didn't play out. There are some vegetarians in the audience. But there was something about this kind of the dirtiness, almost to start to produce a much more surreal. Again, keep in mind that the cinematic, the production of the image is very much in place. So then working through a series of chairs and benches, and we did with similar principles. So we start to look into the things, but also the detachment of the structure from the skin, in very much using butchery techniques. So to do this chair and to do this bench. But there is a whole repertoire that comes from that, and if you follow it, actually it's as precise to follow any kind of descriptive geometry course, but actually give you a lot of insight about how to manipulate and operate in a three-dimensional environment. So, of course, there is a kind of anecdotic and shock effect of working with butchery and cows and all that, but there's also an incredibly precise way to do the thing. So that's always what interests me between these objects of obsession, that I call it. I mean, this idea of agencies of contamination that allow you to do that. So in parallel to that, we were commissioned to do a chandelier for Limoges in France. Again, this was, and also I was really looking into the notion of certain literality. I think many of the work that we done in the past, we were flirting with all the things, but always we were working to process of abstractions one way or another. In this one, I was much more interested to produce this level of distortion in a much more literal way. So then we did a whole series of kit versions for these lamps. This one is quite cute. And then Jeff Kibney's commissioned us to see if we can do like literally an art piece made out of meat. So we're trying to figure out how to frost meat and mill it and then combine it with some sort of metal things. And we did a construction drawing. We did this mask for a video for a garage band in Miami. Alessi asked again to revisit some ideas, so we came with this coffee cup and espresso cup, which we just prototype. Actually, it will work better for mate, which is an Argentinian infusion. Doesn't quite work for espresso, I think you're gonna get burned, but we will work in how to make it more precise. We got commissioned by JP Morgan Investment Bank in Los Angeles to do a remote control for them. So when they have meetings and they can call their secretary to bring them coffee. And I have to say, this is very, very tragic. 4 days of work in this, we did like 20 for them. We made more money than 2 years working for Boeing. It's tragic because we call it this art. And banks have all these programs for art investment and whatever. I don't want to get that much in detail because there's a lot of students in the audience and I don't want to depress you and run and cross the street and go to the art school. But it is a little bit like that. Anyway, so this is the real one. It's built there, and they're happy, and so on. Hopefully, they'll commission more stuff. So this flirtation with art became more and more evident. This is a commission that we have right now for the galleries in Miami who want to sell in New York and in London. They commission artwork, which is, believe me, is way more difficult than you think it is when they say, oh, can you do a sculpture and art? And I realized, okay, I mean, one would think it's obvious for us, but it's not so obvious because there's not any specific problem to fight with. To me, the notion of the friction that the enemy that you need to do a project is crucial. When it's a work of art, that thing is out of the... So to me, it created a whole series of conflict. Anyway, we call this series Mercurial Chewing Gum because it's what Wolf Pricks always call my project. You don't do architecture, you do Mercurial Chewing Gum. So these series of pieces are called Mercurial Chewing Gum. It doesn't have any value more than whatever. And the flowers are again. So details to close up, I think it's another shift in paradigm. I think the idea of traditional tectonic detail is moving into a different one. I think people like Greg Lynn has been very, very smart about how to articulate this idea. I'm not so obsessed with those things like Greg is. I'm not as good at putting that together neither. But there is a whole different notion in which the traditional tectonics is moving into different else and something much more synthetic, which I call it close-ups. So it's not so much anymore about the detail of the synthetic thing. The tectonic thing is something much more synthetic. This was our entry for the Helsinki National Library a couple of years ago, which operated a little bit like that. It's the idea that it's accumulation of close-up. Again, it's not, the building doesn't do these things. This is much more a way to construct the film for it. This was one of the few times in my life that I got really excited about the competition result because they did a public exhibition and we were in the top 5 chosen by the people. And I thought, okay, the jury maybe get us in the second phase. Then I thought, okay, the people live in Helsinki, 6 months of night, 6 months of day. There's something wrong with them. But that was the first time I thought, wait, maybe we can do it. But no, we didn't. The jury didn't respect the will of the people, which I feel very much like in Argentina, because that's what Argentinian presidents do. So, in any case, but this was what to me was really important about this project, and the idea that we were trying to work is, it has a lot of constraints. One of them was basically you had to fulfill the block. So it was one of the first projects that we literally said, okay, let's work with the box and let's start to break it down and we go from there. So the strange thing was that what we proposed was more than a library. We proposed a winter park. I mean, Helsinki weather is very, very brutal. So the idea was that we have multiple levels of park. The library really happened in the Fabergé eggs, and the park happened there. So what you would think, but all the bookshelves run through the park. So the idea was treated really the public library, what really are these days, which are public space and not any more libraries in the traditional sense, and to make it much more part of the park than they have in front than there was to make it a library. So in parallel to that, we were doing a lamp for an Italian company called Edison. It was a very simple principle. What if we get a bunch of lamp bulbs and we melt it together, and then you can buy it and you can plug it in any lamp that you already have? We'll see what happens. It may go into production. That family triggered a very bad project that we did for a competition in Taichung. It's probably one of the worst things we ever done. But again, it was this desire to work with the uncanny, the familiarity. Say, what if we work with a glass box or a curtain wall, and the thing that distorts goes down into the park, how you can read that through the plans, and how you can navigate that, and the idea that you can have a kind of a non-typological but a much more progressive sequence of things. The section is not the worst, but this is really very bad. So the last two projects I want to show you, one is a competition that we did for the National Theatre in Bogota, which again, it goes much more in this kind of the uncanny or the familiar or the monstrosity that is somehow relatable, making more horrific. Because part of the problem was in this one we needed to reconstitute the tissue of the city. So there really was kind of a courtyard, and we start to carve the interior. So in many ways there is a kind of a focus monstrosity, let's say, or not, more like it was really an act of butchery, because we make a litter. We fill it the block, and then we start to carve and manipulate that carving. So the whole project really happens in the courtyard, which again is not such an original idea. It's something that pretty much every medieval city in Europe has. But to me it was interesting because again, it created this sort of a tension between the recognizable familiar things that we can relate to it and all these other things, the other possibilities of the species, of this mutation, this series of mutants form that come from carving that, and the relation between both of them. I don't know. I think I think it's something that interests me very much these days, and we're planning to keep working on it. So, like everybody else in the world, we did the Guggenheim Museum competition for Helsinki, Finland. It's another of our, what I call, happy errors. Oops, sorry. Supposed to play. What happened here? Hold on. Bear with me. Okay, let me replace it. It always happens. Technology will always let you down. Movies, projects. Where are you? Here you are. Oh, sorry, I got the wrong Helsinki. I got the library. Well, doesn't look we're going to have any luck. Okay, I guess I'll owe you that one for the next time, the animation. No big deal. But this is what we did, and basically it was one of the few projects in a long time that we were looking into a program as a way to driven, and basically we wrote it like that. This was almost the opposite of Guggenheim by Frank Gehry in the sense of all the gallery space is inside those strange shapes, and everything that is public and whatever is the most normative space. We were trying to reverse the logic. I mean, the idea to produce, which clearly is not a good strategy since we didn't make it. But the idea was to reverse and force a different kind of negotiation between the notion of how the the exhibition space will work versus the public space. So the idea was that the public space will be much more normative and the exhibition space will be less usual, let's say, for the lack of a better word. So these were the plans. And the last project is the one that I show you the very first animation, which was the Budapest Museum. And I think, I like what we attempt to do in Guggenheim and what we did in this one. And I think the next generation, the next autopsy project, is going to come out of these two. This one still was by the accumulation of carving and only carving pieces, while the other one was to leave the carcasses and the carving and how you can negotiate the relation between both of them. And this one was, I would say, is way more monomaniac and relentless in the repetition of the features. So right now the work is trapped between these two ways to go around, and I'm very curious to see how we're going to start to negotiate these two things and what is the number 6 agent of contamination that will come to play, which is not clear to yet. I mean, we still are in the butchery phase, but it's moving into something else that is not so linear in relation to that. So this project to me is interesting in that sense because it worked with kind of relentless accumulation. So there is a certain desire to produce, even though it may come through like that, but there's a desire to see if we can remove the power of the singular form and have a multiplicity of it, and to see if we can remove the idea of an object or a singular object in relation to automatic notion with form. But this is to be seen. It's not really so clear and apparent to me where it's going to go from it. So I would like to finish with a clip I always use to finish.
This was a support.
I'm really okay. Trust me. Everything's gonna be fine. You met me at a very strange time in my life.
So you tell your clients, trust me, everything is going to be fine, but you should always tell your students and your colleagues, you met me at a very strange time of my life. Thank you very much.
Trust me, Hernan.
I trust you.
I'm curious about your reliance, which seems to maybe be changing the last project, on the shiny surface, because for all of the interest in not just butchery, but the grotesque and
This is the one I promised you, sorry about the cow. Yeah.
and the horrific. The thing that keeps making it beautiful and doesn't go into more dangerous territory, I think, is the shiny surface,
Yeah.
which always makes it beautiful. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering when you're going to give that up.
I don't think we're going to give it up anytime soon. We try many times. To me, that's a concession that, I don't know. I mean, the problem of beauty always wins in my internal fights. Like my desire is always, let's see how far we can go. But then I always feel like you need to come back somehow to that. Also, I think it has to do with my incapacity. I'm serious about this. My incapacity to think in terms of colors and to work with some of that conditioned materiality. And also have to do my own limitations to don't be so quick on my feet when it comes to materials. And I think part of that is my fault, but part of that is also too that we don't get that many projects that you really get to that phase that far that you go to explore that. So for example, the project, I didn't show it to you, but the original version of the bridge in Barcelona didn't have any shiny thing. It was all bamboo. It was 4 times more expensive than doing in metal. So we had to back down from that. We try we try here and there. I haven't worked it out. And also I think it's one of the things I have in common with fish. I'm attracted to shiny things. So there is something, but I think it goes back to the notion of rituals. I think there's my fascination with the shiny, the refinement that goes with the... So I'm not ready to go all primitive. You know what I mean? So, but... you're not the first one who asked me and encouraged me in going the direction, so we'll probably give it a shot soon.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Peter, as an old mentor,
Don't force him to claim me.
Thank you. Don't. Yeah. I'll tell you what worried me the most. When I have to say, when I saw the scale of where the bridge was in this little pipsqueak canal, and I thought to myself, when I had first seen the bridge, I thought it was crossing the Aleutian Straits or something. And it's really, a teeny little backwater canal. And I think, what about the relationship of the scale and meaning of a project to the energy of the forms that you put in? Because it seems to me that whether you're making a fork, a knife, a glass, a pavilion, a bridge, a building, it's the same level of energy.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's a problem. What do you think?
Well, it is a problem. It is a problem to understand, but I try to work that problem into something that it can become a possibility to think about some of those projects in a different way. So I would say yes, it's a problem in the way that we traditionally understand that. I don't see it so much as a problem because. To me, actually, if you tell me that the bridge looks way bigger than what it is, I take it as a compliment, because that's part of some of the things where I was talking about the scaleless quality of the work that interests me. So I can understand what you see as a problem, and I think you may have a fair point to it. But at the same time, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And then you show me 10 projects and say, which one is butchery? I wouldn't know. How would one know?
I know.
Yeah, but because you invented the term, but we don't need to appreciate what we saw.
I love that you find that puzzling when you've been the master for the last 50 years to inventing a word that only you fully understand. So I learned from the best. Jokes aside, what I want to say is this. When I talk about butchery, I'm not saying that the whole work is about butchery. What I'm saying is I use butchery as a mechanism of contamination or something that is very embedded in the own nature of the software. So the work is 100% embedded in the digital ideology, for the lack of a better word. So I think all these things are efforts to try to see how much we can take it out of that. So it's not that all the projects are butchery, and I think that they're all different. And by the way, I don't think they should not, I think it's okay that we don't know which one is better than the other one, because I'm not interested to work in those terms. I'm interested to work in the projects that have that life, and some of them, maybe none of them are better than the others, and I'm okay with that. So I think your criticism is fair, and you for sure have a point, but at the same time, what I'm saying to you is part of that criticism is what I'm trying to build as a possibility to work through that problem. I think there is some other things which are practical aspects. Sometimes you develop projects when you have a client and the problem became evident, so you work through it and you have time to work through it. Some of these projects are competition projects, and you work through a process in months and a half, and they live and die by those terms. So some of the things you do it, and you look back here, and you're horrified, what have I done? But it's done. And I think it serves the purpose to get better later on. So I don't know. I always like a lot the notion of music and albums and so on. And one of my favorite musicians, which is an Argentinian guy called Gustavo Cerati, who died last year, in an interview, he says, look, I'm aware that some of my songs are better than others. I'm aware that some people like my songs and others. Now, if you ask me, I wrote every song thinking it was a hit. So every project that we do, I think is the best thing that we've done. Then you look at it, but at the same time, I don't see it in a way that this one is better than the other one, better than the other one. I don't work by multiplicity. I always have a very clear sense what the project wants to be, and the process is to get there. So, I don't know. Yeah.
There's a question right here.
Hi, thanks for that. If for a minute...
Do you really mean it? I always have the feeling when the students give a lecture, say, thank you for a great lecture. And I am thinking, it was a terrible lecture. How can I be thinking? So, if you don't mean it, don't thank me.
No,
just ask a question. No, I know. I'm just asking. Do you really mean it?
I enjoyed the lecture. Thank you.
Okay.
So my question is, if for a minute we were to assume that the buildings that you're suggesting, the environments that you're suggesting are not weird, and if that's sort of the new world, the totality, then the only thing that really strikes me to be weird is the sort of flat floors, floor slabs, the wood decking. Just wondering if you would comment on that.
I always have that discussion with Tom Main. He always gets pissed off. They come to my reviews of my project and say, but you put floors. Yeah, I couldn't come with a better idea to walk than a flat surface. What I mean by that is, I think, first of all, I really believe this. I don't believe that what I do is weird. I try to give this the best answer I give to a problem. Now, I understand that people can perceive it as that. So, to me, to have floors, to have a section, to have elevator, stairs, is what I do, is what I learned to do, and I think is what part of architecture does. The architects that I admire, they did that, and they didn't stop them for innovate and push the boundaries. So some of them better than others, true. But I don't think, and this is something I had to work on it, I'm still not quite there, I don't think you need to challenge every convention. There are certain things that, like for example, none of my projects challenge gravity. I don't work like that. That's what I'm saying when people, as much as I love Levius Booth, which I love him as a friend, I really don't like when people compare what I do with Levius, because Levius made a conscious decision to don't operate in the world of architecture. I haven't. Now the world of architecture and the client would not want to accept me is a different discussion. But I haven't made that decision. I'm interested in working when I'm working, I'm interested in doing them, and when we have the chance, we develop them, and we try to build them. So, and part of that is to accept certain convention. Now, clearly, I'm willing to accept less convention than other of my colleagues, and that's fine too. But I don't know. It's a little bit like you ever see the movie Wedding Crashers? At the very end, there is this guy, Will Ferrell, is crushing funerals. And Owen Wilson turned to the guy, hey, funerals, man, I don't want to judge you because you're an innovator, but I don't think I'm ready for that. So that's how I feel about floor things and gravity. I'm not ready to go there.
Yeah, I have a question. I never thought about the earlier relationship you had with Marias, but I actually can see it a little bit in the work. And I'm curious I don't know how he produced his drawings, but there is the same interested in repetitive cell, a plane that unites, and a line that is ubiquitous and affiliative to things around it that is shared in the quality of your work. And I'm wondering, with the software that you're using that assigns materiality very quickly, whether that limits some of the investigations you may be thinking about in terms of materiality, which you said you haven't really thought about yet, but whether that's another way of moving it from the abstraction, say his drawings, to the hyper-reality that's already embedded into the software that you're working with. Is that something you've played off of consciously?
It's something I want to play more of. It hasn't become that clear yet. I mean, part of, I don't know, but the thing I was showing, the animation with the cows and all that, that was kind of a poor man's attempt to start to play with certain level of dirtiness. There was something I always admire of Enrique's work was the capacity he has also to work with this kind of, I mean, all his buildings are they're all poorly built, most of them until the Scottish Parliament, because they were working in small towns and so on, but he would totally embrace that level of dirtiness and so on, which is something that the computers take you away from it. I mean, there's a certain level of dirtiness. So all in a way, all these are efforts to see how much dirtiness we can bring into the computer, even though it's a very septic. And I work a lot inside that contradiction. I'm very aware of that contradiction, and it's part of my own contradiction. We have to do with my fascination with technology and super. In a way, I think, and I think this may be related to what Peggy was asking. If you ask me, I realize when you put all the work together, that in a way I could argue that what I do, it will be called maximalism, because in a way there is a lot of excess and a lot of stuff, but it never take off to become completely dirty or whatever. It's always pull back and try to have some sort of elegance and proportion that they're very conventional. So it's not minimalism by any means, but he has that kind of idea to be in tune all the time. So, and I think that's something, by the way, that I think Enrique was really good at it. I mean, to me, all his work was always in control, despite what people think. I think he was incredibly precise. But yeah, no, it's dirtiness is pretty cool, but I don't know. It's like many other things in life, right? Dirtiness seems interesting in the abstract, but then when you're into the dirtiness, it's never that interesting.
I think this part of the evening over.
All right.
We have all been shaken and stirred at the same time, and let's try to carry it on in the gallery upstairs.
Thank you.